36 hours after the CEO told me the door was behind me, corporate counsel slid a thin gray folder across the table and said something that didn't fit the story I'd heard my entire life. My father hadn't been abandoned. According to the contract archive, someone had tried to save him, and the signature at the bottom of the page changed everything. The first thing people notice about the 23rd floor of Halverson Global isn't the view, it's the silence. The kind of silence that isn't empty, but tense, as if every polished desk, every glass wall, every muted conversation knows exactly how much money moves through this building every minute. It smells faintly of coffee, printer toner, and the expensive citrus polish someone uses on the conference tables. When the elevator doors opened that morning, every instinct in my body told me the same thing. You don't belong here. I stepped out anyway. My name is Zoe. And 3 minutes later, the CEO of the company that had shaped my father's entire career would tell me to leave. The receptionist barely looked up when I approached the desk. Name? Zoe Carter. Her fingers paused above the keyboard for half a second, just long enough for the name to register. A flicker crossed her face. Not curiosity, recognition. Then it disappeared. You're expected. Conference room B. Expected. That word hung in the air like a quiet contradiction. Because the moment I entered the conference room, I knew the man standing at the far end had not been expecting me at all. Daniel Halverson looked exactly like the kind of CEO financial magazines loved to photograph. Tall, composed, silver beginning to thread through dark hair, suit perfectly tailored in that effortless way that actually requires terrifying amounts of effort. But it wasn't his appearance that filled the room. It was the way people around him adjusted themselves. Back straighter, voices quieter, movement smaller. Authority has a gravity. And Halverson carried it like someone who had worn it for decades. He didn't offer a handshake. Instead, he studied me for exactly 3 seconds, long enough to make a decision. Then he said it. If you're here because of your father, the door's there. No anger, no raised voice, just cold efficiency. Expectation reversal. Most people in that room expected one of two reactions: anger or pleading. Both would have confirmed the same story everyone in this building believed: that my father's daughter had come looking for sympathy, revenge, or a second chance he had supposedly destroyed. But there's something about silence that makes powerful people uncomfortable. So I didn't argue. I didn't defend him. I simply sat down. The leather chair creaked softly under my weight. I'm here for the analyst position, I said calmly. Something shifted in the room. Not dramatic, just subtle enough that if you weren't watching carefully, you'd miss it. But I was watching carefully. Daniel Halverson leaned back slightly, studying me again. This time not as a problem, but as a variable that didn't behave the way he expected. Human resources approved your application, he said. It wasn't a question. Correct. Another pause. Then slowly he nodded once. Fine. Just like that. The interview lasted 12 minutes. Not because I rushed, because he did. Every question came sharp and precise. Financial modeling, risk evaluation, contract exposure scenarios. The kind of questions designed less to test knowledge and more to observe how a person thinks under pressure. I answered them the same way my father used to teach me to solve chess puzzles. Quietly, directly, no theatrics. Halfway through, something interesting happened. Halverson stopped looking skeptical. He started looking curious. At exactly 10:42 a.m., he closed the folder in front of him. Specific time markers matter in negotiations. They anchor memory. My father had explained that years ago over a kitchen table scattered with legal pads and cold coffee. People remember stories, he'd said once, but contracts remember time. HR will send your onboarding documents, Halverson said. That was it. No congratulations. No welcome speech. Just a decision. The room began to empty, chairs sliding back quietly, assistants collecting folders, executives checking phones as if the moment had already ended. But I wasn't finished. Mr. Halverson, I said. He stopped halfway to the door. Slowly, he turned. The room was nearly empty now. Just him, Me and the faint hum of the city far below the glass windows. Yes? I folded my hands on the table. Composed, measured. Legal authority language works best when it sounds ordinary. I'll need access to the contract archive, I said. A small crease appeared between his brows. What for? Historical risk analysis, I replied. Technically true. He watched me carefully now. Which records? There it was. The moment where most people would hesitate. But hesitation creates suspicion. So I gave the answer exactly the way my father used to quote legal clauses: clean, precise, undeniable. The 2018 contracts. For a brief second, the temperature in the room seemed to drop. Not dramatically, just enough. Halverson didn't move. Behind him, someone in the hallway laughed, distant, casual, completely unaware that inside this room the air had shifted. Those files aren't relevant to your position, he said. Corporate risk is cumulative, I replied. Patterns matter. Another silence, longer this time. He studied me the way experienced negotiators study contracts, searching for hidden language between the lines. And maybe he saw something, or maybe he didn't want to. Finally, he nodded once. You'll need approval from corporate counsel. That wasn't a refusal, it was a gate. And gates are meant to be opened. Understood. He walked out without another word. The door closed softly behind him. For a few seconds, I remained alone in the quiet conference room, staring at the reflection of the city in the glass wall. 18 years. That's how long the story about my father had existed inside this building. 18 years of people repeating the same version of events until it hardened into something that sounded like truth. But archives don't care about stories. Archives remember documents, signatures, dates, clauses, and sometimes they remember things people hoped would stay buried. When I left the conference room, the receptionist looked up again. This time her expression was different. Curious, cautious. First day? She asked. Something like that. Back at my assigned desk, a temporary station near the compliance department, I opened my laptop and began the quiet work of someone who plans to stay unnoticed. Emails, access requests, internal directories, and then, finally, the message that mattered. Subject: Archive Access Request. Requested records, contract database, year 2018. I hovered over the send button for a moment, not because I doubted the decision, because I knew exactly what it would trigger. Corporate counsel reviews every archive request connected to legal exposure, especially old ones, especially sensitive ones, especially the year my father disappeared from this company's history. I pressed send. Across the office, someone dropped a stack of folders. A printer started humming. Outside the windows, the city moved like a living machine of traffic and light. Everything looked normal. But somewhere inside the legal department, an alert had just appeared on someone's screen. And sooner or later, someone would open the file that contained the truth about what happened in 2018. The only question was whether they would realize what that truth meant. Before I did. Some stories wait years before the first page is turned. This one had just begun. And if the archive contained what I suspected, the next 36 hours inside this building were going to make a lot of very powerful people uncomfortable. The legal department of Halverson Global lived on the 21st floor, 2 levels below the executive suites, but somehow heavier. Not in architecture, in atmosphere. The air felt slower there, like every decision carried weight measured not in opinions, but in consequences. Frosted glass doors, quiet hallways, shelves of binders that looked untouched but somehow knew everything. That was where my request had gone. And requests like mine didn't disappear. They circulated. At 11:03 a.m., the internal system confirmed delivery, corporate counsel review, pending. That timestamp mattered. Because inside companies like this, information travels faster than elevators. By 11:17, 2 compliance analysts had already opened my request. By 11:32, someone in legal flagged it for secondary review. By 11:41, my name appeared in a conversation that wasn't happening in any official system. I knew all this not because someone told me, but because offices breathe. And if you sit quietly enough, you can feel the change. Across from my desk, a man named Greg, mid 40s, the kind of employee who had mastered the art of staying invisible in a corporation, glanced at me twice in the span of 10 minutes. The second time, he spoke. "You're the new analyst?" His voice carried the careful neutrality of someone testing the water before stepping in. "Zoe," I said. "Greg?" We shook hands lightly across the desks. His grip was polite, but his eyes were calculating. "You're working compliance support?" "For now." He nodded slowly. Then his gaze dropped to my monitor. Not reading, just observing. Another office habit. "What kind of records are you looking for?" he asked casually. Expectation reversal works best when people believe they're asking harmless questions. "Historical contract exposure," I said. That answer should have ended the conversation. Instead, Greg leaned back in his chair. "Funny," he said. "What is?" "Legal almost never opens the 2018 archive." A small ripple moved through my chest, the emotional equivalent of a chess piece touching the board. But outwardly, I only shrugged. Patterns matter. Greg watched me for a moment longer. Then he gave a soft laugh. "Careful," he said. "Patterns are dangerous around here." He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to, because sometimes the most revealing information is the sentence someone chooses not to finish. The afternoon unfolded quietly. Emails, data reports, small tasks that made me look exactly like what everyone believed I was, a new analyst trying to prove herself. But every hour I checked the internal system. Archive request, status, under legal review. At 2:08 p.m., the status changed. Secondary counsel assigned. That meant someone senior had noticed. My father used to say something about corporate law that stayed with me long after he stopped working here. "Companies don't hide the truth," he once said, while marking notes in a contract margin. "They bury it under procedure." Which meant the real question wasn't whether the files existed. It was how hard someone had tried to keep them closed. Around 3:40 p.m., the office began to thin. Meetings, client calls, executives disappearing into glass conference rooms. Greg packed up a stack of folders and paused before leaving. "You're still here?" he asked. "Learning the systems." He hesitated, then lowered his voice slightly. "You know what happened in 2018, right?" The question landed softly, like a stone dropped into very still water. I met his eyes. "I know the version people tell." Greg studied me carefully. For a second, I wondered if he would say something real. Instead, he exhaled slowly. "Then you know why people don't go digging." He left without waiting for a reply. The office lights dimmed automatically as evening approached. Through the tall windows, the city was shifting into dusk, towers glowing, traffic lines turning into ribbons of red and white. And somewhere inside the legal department, someone was still reading my request. At 7:12 p.m., my laptop chimed softly. Not an approval, a message. From Corporate Counsel Office. Subject, archive request, clarification. My pulse quickened just enough to notice. The message was short. "Ms. Carter, please confirm the legal basis for requesting access to contract records dated 2018. Corporate Counsel." There it was. Legal authority language. Not why, but legal basis. They were testing the strength of the request. My father's voice echoed faintly in memory. Never argue with lawyers emotionally. Speak their language. So I replied with one sentence. Under internal compliance review standards, access to historical contract documentation is required to identify cumulative risk exposure. No emotion, no explanation, just procedure. I pressed send. For several minutes, nothing happened. Then the message status changed. Read, 7:19 p.m. A small detail. But details matter. Because someone inside that department had just realized something. The request wasn't emotional. It was legally valid. And rejecting it would require a written reason. In corporate law, written reasons are dangerous. By 8:04 p.m., the system updated again. Archive request escalated to senior counsel, which meant someone higher up had stepped in. And that's when the real silence began. The office was nearly empty now, only the quiet hum of ventilation and the distant rhythm of elevators moving between floors. I shut down my laptop and stood. Tomorrow would bring answers. Or resistance. Maybe both. As I walked toward the elevators, the glass walls reflected the office behind me. Rows of desks, screens glowing faintly, a company that had carefully built a narrative about what happened to my father 18 years ago. But narratives and documents are not the same thing. One is told, the other is signed. And somewhere in the contract archive of 2018, there was a signature that didn't fit the story anyone here believed. The question wasn't whether the truth existed. The question was why the legal department was suddenly so interested in who was looking for it. Because if corporate counsel had escalated my request this quickly, it meant they already knew exactly which file I was about to open. Something in the 2018 archive made senior counsel step in immediately. Follow the story and comment below. What do you think they're trying to keep closed? The next morning, the city was a canvas of gold and steel. Sunlight glinted off glass towers, traffic streamed in organized chaos, and the smell of fresh coffee drifted up from the streets below. Inside Halverson Global, the 21st floor was already awake, humming softly with the rhythm of compliance officers and junior analysts tapping keyboards, printers whirring, phones buzzing. I arrived early, slipping past the security turnstiles with my access badge still warm in the scanner. Every floor had its rhythm, but this one felt heavier, like the air itself remembered decades of agreements, disputes, and carefully filed secrets. I paused for a moment in the hallway outside the legal office, letting the quiet tension sink in. This was where the stories of 2018 slept, tucked behind locked doors, waiting for someone to turn the pages. By 8:15 a.m., I was seated at a temporary desk in the legal wing, laptop open, fingers poised. My request had been escalated the night before, and corporate counsel had taken notice. The waiting was almost unbearable, each passing minute stretching longer than the last. Around 8:47 a.m., the notification arrived. Access granted. Contract Archive 2018. A small thrill ran through me. The office around me continued its quiet drone, oblivious to what this meant. I opened the folder carefully, each click of the mouse sounding louder than it should. Digital pages unfurled like old scrolls, contracts signed in ink and stamped with dates that traced back to the very year my father's story had shifted. Patterns began to emerge almost immediately. Certain clauses repeated, signatures shifted between departments, and annotations, subtle, almost invisible, hinted at a desperate attempt to cover actions taken in my father's favor. A microcliff. One document showed a legal intervention, time-stamped in a way that didn't match any standard protocol. Someone had broken the rules. Someone had tried to save him. The more I read, the clearer it became. My father hadn't been abandoned. He had been trapped in corporate maneuvering, manipulated by those whose loyalty to procedure outweighed loyalty to truth. The files contained everything: emails, internal memos, approval chains, enough to reconstruct a sequence of events deliberately obscured from public and private memory. Every revelation pulled me deeper. Each contract, each marginal note, each official stamp was a step toward vindication. And yet there was a careful balance here: exposure without chaos. I couldn't let my presence trigger alarms, couldn't reveal the archive prematurely. Around noon, a subtle change occurred. My actions had been noticed. Footsteps approached. Greg, the seemingly invisible analyst, leaned over my shoulder. "You're deep," he said softly. "Patterns," I replied. "They matter more than people think." He nodded, a flicker of understanding passing in his eyes. The hours that followed were a delicate dance. I cross-referenced contracts, traced approvals, and marked inconsistencies. Each microcliff of discovery, a timestamp mismatch, a missing signature, a contradicting memo, was a piece of the puzzle. And slowly, the picture of my father's ordeal emerged, as vivid and precise as the contracts themselves. By late afternoon, the office felt charged, though nothing had visibly changed. The hum of printers and quiet typing masked the tension of history being rewritten, quietly, legally, irreversibly. And somewhere in the shadows of corporate counsel, someone knew that the story of 2018 was no longer a secret. FOMO moment. If corporate counsel realized how much I had uncovered, they might move to intervene. But what would that cost them? And could they stop me now? Evening descended on Halverson Global, but the 21st floor refused to sleep. Desks glowed under fluorescent lights. Monitors reflected tired eyes, and the quiet hum of machinery was a constant reminder that the office lived 24/7 in its own world. I stayed at my desk, cross-referencing contracts, highlighting discrepancies, and noting timestamps that didn't match the official records. Every detail mattered. Small inconsistencies were clues to the larger story. Greg appeared again, almost silently, placing a thin folder next to my laptop. "Senior counsel left this for you," he said. I raised an eyebrow. "Left it?" "Just dropped it. Nobody's watching." I opened the folder carefully. Inside were handwritten notes, internal emails, and memos that confirmed everything I had started to piece together. My father had been intentionally blocked from critical approvals, yet there were attempts, subtle and dangerous, yet to protect him. Someone in the legal hierarchy had taken risks on his behalf. The patterns became a map of courage and caution. Names, timestamps, and signatures intertwined to reveal not just corporate bureaucracy, but deliberate action. Someone had tried to save my father despite the system. Every so often, I paused to let the information sink in. The atmosphere in the office was thick with tension. The quiet became almost oppressive, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Outside, the city lights blurred through the windows, casting long shadows across the desks. A microcliff appeared in the margin of a memo, a cryptic note indicating that a particular contract should never have been processed without executive approval. It was buried in the footnotes, easy to miss, but unmistakable to someone who knew what to look for. I felt the weight of history pressing down. My father's story, carefully hidden, was slowly coming into focus. And with each discovery, the stakes grew higher. Corporate counsel might realize how much had been uncovered, but by now I had a strategy. Everything I found was legally valid, supported by documents, timestamps, and signed approvals. The law was my shield. Hours passed in silence, punctuated only by the occasional sound of someone walking past my desk or the soft click of a keyboard. By the time the office lights dimmed for the night, I had compiled a dossier that mapped every attempt to protect my father, every obstruction, and every subtle act of defiance that had occurred in 2018. I leaned back in my chair, exhausted but exhilarated. The city outside was alive, unaware that inside these walls, history had been rewritten in quiet precision. The tension was a living thing, pulsing through the office, a reminder that the truth could be dangerous, even when it was entirely legal. FOMO moment. One misstep could alert corporate counsel, but one more piece of evidence would make the story undeniable. Who would blink first? Morning arrived with a muted glow, the city still waking, the streets filled with the low rumble of cars and the occasional siren. Inside Halverson Global, the 21st floor was quieter than usual. People moved with cautious efficiency, as if aware that the archive I had accessed yesterday had already stirred subtle ripples throughout the building. I sat at my desk, reviewing the final pieces of the 2018 dossier. Every document, email, and contract clause had been cross-referenced, creating a mosaic that was both precise and damning. My father's name appeared repeatedly, not as the failed executive the company narrative had painted, but as a man caught between protocol and clandestine attempts to save him. Greg appeared once more, lingering near the doorway. "You're ready," he said simply. I nodded, eyes scanning the last set of files. The evidence was complete. No argument could challenge it. The documentation was airtight. The corporate landscape I had entered weeks ago was about to shift quietly but irrevocably. I uploaded the compiled dossier to my secure drive and prepared a brief legal summary. Every statement, every timestamp, and every contract anomaly was highlighted. Corporate counsel would have no choice but to acknowledge it. No theatrics, no vendetta. Just the law speaking louder than whispers, gossip, or decades of carefully constructed stories. The microcliff came as I opened a final email from the council office. We are ready to review your findings. Please schedule a meeting. It was subtle, almost polite, but it meant everything. In that one line, I felt the weight of corporate authority bending under the quiet precision of documented truth. The meeting would be formal, controlled, and entirely procedural, yet it represented the first real step toward vindicating my father. As I closed my laptop, the office seemed different. The same hum, the same rows of desks, but now charged with anticipation. Every corner could hide observation, every corridor could carry a whisper, and yet none of it mattered. The documents didn't lie. Patterns didn't bend. And I had learned to navigate the silent power currents that ran beneath the polished surfaces of Halverson Global. Outside, the city stretched endlessly, a network of light and shadow, oblivious to the quiet revolution that was unfolding within one building. For the first time in years, I allowed myself a small, satisfied smile. Justice, quiet, lawful, undeniable, was within reach.